Welcome everybody. So I have a brand new YouTube review, and this is going to be for Wonder Woman. So Wonder Woman stars Gal Gadot, or Gal Gadot, whichever you prefer to use. This movie also stars Chris Pine, as well as a variety of different other actors. This movie is directed by Patty Jenkins, a movie director that I'm not really too familiar with, but I know that she's done other things in the past. This movie pretty much starts out where you see a young, naive girl, Diana Prince. She's learning to kind of grow up within the Amazons. The Amazons are these island of women who are really tough, badass female warriors within the DC cinematic universe. So pretty much like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but with DC comic book heroes. This is one of the movies that I actually really wanted to hate. You know, this movie, I've been burned pretty much in the past by Zack Snyder and Batman vs. Superman. I did not have really high hopes for this film. I thought maybe this movie might flop and then it might not be good. And I actually came out loving this movie. This is probably one of my favorite DC movies aside from Man of Steel. I know some people have issues with Man of Steel and the destruction stuff, but I honestly don't give a shit. Like, I think it's one of my favorite films that's come out within the DC universe. So after she starts to kind of come into her own, she starts learning that there's this thing called the God Killer, which can defeat Ares, and Ares is this guy who kind of is like Satan, where kind of manipulates things behind the scenes and causes destruction. He doesn't actually influence any of the wars and stuff. He just pretty much is behind the scenes manipulating so these things happen, which he eventually like explains later on in the film. Everyone thinks that this guy named Ludendorff is actually the main bad guy in this film, which later on, spoiler alert, you find out that he's not, and then it's actually one of the person leading the Allied charge against the Germans in World War I. We also meet Chris Pine, who crash land the Themyscira, which is the island that all the Amazon women reside on, and Gal Gadot kind of saves Chris Pine after his biplane crashes into the water. This leads the Germans to also find the Themyscira. They eventually, have this big giant battle sequence where some of the Amazons die. Chris Pine blamed for such acts and stuff, and they determine whether or not they're gonna kick Chris Pine's character off of the island. This sets Diana to sneak into the area that Chris Pine is being held prisoner at because they don't trust him, because he kind of admitted that he was a spy working for the Allies in the war, and they hold him hostage. That's where you kind of get this kind of funny sequence where Diana first meets Chris Pine. She kind of hasn't met a man before until Chris Pine kind of crash lands into the Pacific Ocean, and she develops sort of a bond with him. This leads her to break him out, and then they escape and go to London, where she thinks that if she goes to the front lines and defeats Ares, aka the god of war, that she can actually stop the war, which is a little bit naive of her to say. Just because you stop one bad guy doesn't mean that there's not going to be another bad guy to take over, which kind of Chris Pine towards the end of the film does this amazing speech where he's like, oh yeah, we're probably the problem. Like, everybody that's ever involved in the war is pretty much the bad guy, and that there's no kind of right or wrong. It's kind of just human nature that sometimes people are just evil, and she doesn't really believe that. She still thinks that there's good in humanity. They're worth fighting for, and I thought that scene was really well done. There's a lot of cool scenes like that within the film. There's a scene where one of the town gets kind of gassed by the Germans, and Wonder Woman kind of goes in there and she kind of realizes the horrors of war, and this is something that you've pretty much read in books and stuff like that. I thought they really did a good job portraying in this film. I didn't know how they're going to take it, whether they're going to go kind of like comical with this or if they're going to actually take it seriously, which I'm kind of glad that they did, because not only does this kind of give Diana reason to fight for the humans, but she kind of realizes kind of what they're all fighting for on both sides. And there's also that awesome scene that takes place on the front lines where you have Diana taking up the shield, and she's kind of taking the brunt of the fire. At first, Chris Pine's character is like, yeah, no, this is kind of what we're doing. We're pretty much stuck here. We can't move because this is no man's land and nobody kind of has been able to move up. And so Diana kind of just takes off her robes and stuff and kind of reveals the Wonder Woman suit, and she kind of takes the brunt of the weapons fire. As she's running out into the middle of the field, she actually pulls out her shield and gets kind of taken down by weapons fire. And then finally Chris Pine's character kind of issues an attack upon the Germans to kind of help her out so that she can eventually break the front lines and eventually move through the city. Meanwhile, Chris Pine and Gal Gadot's character is kind of trying to kind of form a relationship and a bond and stuff. You kind of see that a little bit on the ship when Diana Prince asks Chris Pine's character, aka Steve Trevor, if he wants to sleep with her, and he's kind of talking about how like you only sleep together with like marriage and stuff like that. She is kind of unaware of that because she's kind of lived on a secluded island pretty much by herself with sort of marriage status. So it's kind of cool to see how naive she is. Like, she's the character that's kind of learning this stuff as she's going on, and she does struggle a little bit in this film. Not everything goes her way. She's kind of learning to grow along with the characters in this movie. This eventually leads to the scene where Diana discovers that Ludendorff is planning a plot to kind of drop some bombs on a nearby town. Chris Pine eventually figures out that if he stops one of the planes carrying these weapons, that he could pretty much end the war and stop it at the same time. Diana doesn't really want to go with him because she's always been led to believe that once she stops Ares, that the war is pretty much over. And Chris Pine is like, no, you can't. Like, if you just stop one bad guy, then more bad guys are going to follow. That they have to do this so that they can stop this war altogether. That if these gas bombs kind of reach the town, that the war is pretty much lost. And so he sacrifices himself towards the end of the film. Kind of a heartbreaking scene because you've seen Chris Pine and Steve Trevor kind of grow along Wonder Woman, and it's pretty heartbreaking. I think they're going to retcon that scene in the sequel, or they're going to try and explain away that, maybe Chris Pine had a parachute and he kind of got out after the explosion. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen the movie, which I don't know why you haven't seen that. And then this leads to the fight between Wonder Woman and Ares, which you really find out who really is the main bad guy. I'm not going to spoil it for you because I really want you to go see this film. There's a lot of cool action sequences that kind of remind me of Zack Snyder's 300. They use a lot of the slow-mo, fast pace where you kind of like go in with like a swing and they kind of slow down as it's kind of like making its move and then kind of speed up and everything, which I really like that kind of visual effects style. I think Zack Snyder kind of nailed it, and that's kind of why they used it throughout most of the DC Universe films, because he was kind of heading the charge, kind of like Kevin Feige was doing with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I like some of the battle sequences. Like I said, I like the World War I sort of trench warfare stuff. Like that stuff is just awesome because I've read about it so many times as a kid and studied it so many times growing up because I was a huge fan of, you know, world history and world wars. And so getting to see that stuff, kind of like with Solo, a Star Wars story, was really awesome to see. There's some awesome battle sequences in the village, and you see Wonder Woman kind of taking charge, front lines like slamming through buildings, killing bad guys and stuff. And then at one point there's a sniper in a bell tower on a church. She leaps off of one of the car doors that Chris Pine and the other people in the squad are lifting to kind of let her leap into the air and slam into the church bell. And that causes the bell to kind of get demolished and destroyed. There's other sequences like that throughout the film where they're kind of in battles and stuff, and Wonder Woman is just kicking ass and stuff, which I really like seeing that. You know, when you have a strong female character who goes through growth and triumphs over evil eventually, it's awesome. Like you see the struggle that she goes through, like whether or not she should protect the humans or not, or whether she should destroy them like Ares wants. There's a scene in the movie where Ares kind of tempts her, kind of like either the Darth Vader scene from A New Hope or kind of in like some of the religious stuff where you have the bad guy trying to create a new utopia, and that if they kind of destroy the human, then they can kind of build up the utopia on top of that destruction. Wonder Woman's like, yeah, I don't think I can stand for this, and she actually goes against Ares' wishes. I like that, you know, some of the action sequences she uses her, you know, classic weapons. I like the fact that in this movie, the God Killer isn't actually the weapon. You later find out that it's actually Wonder Woman who's the God Killer, and that it's actually her because only a god can kill another god. I think that was a pretty genius line, because it's kind of true, because like who would be able to stop like Ares and stuff? It wouldn't be a weapon, it'd be like another god that has the same abilities, if not better, which is Wonder Woman actually has. I think the visual effects of this movie are awesome. They usually use mostly practical sets and stuff because it does take place in World War I. Occasionally you see visual effects like with her rope and stuff. Sometimes they can't actually physically use that within the set, though. You know, that stuff kind of has to be CGI. But for the most part, they try to use as much practical effects as they physically can. And I really love it when movie studios do that, because they could easily have just done a full CGI film with green screen and stuff, but it just wouldn't be as cool. So I'm going to have to give Wonder Woman an A. I think this movie definitely deserves it. I'll have to review Wonder Woman 2, or Wonder Woman 1984, I think is what they're calling it, when that comes out. But for the most part, I think that if you're looking for a really good DC movie to watch, this is definitely the one to watch. There's a lot more stuff that I could kind of talk about in movie review, but I kind of wanted to condense it just so that you guys can watch it for yourselves and find out what's awesome about it and what's not. Not only are the visual effects great, but the suit is good. When I first heard that Gal Gadot was being cast as Wonder Woman, I didn't think she was actually, you know, tough enough or the build that's right for the comic book characters, but she excels it, and she was actually in the Israeli military, so I didn't find that out till later on in the film franchise, but she excels at all of her acting. I think there isn't a stale moment with any of the characters in this film, so yeah, that's why I have to give Wonder Woman an A. I think that you guys should definitely check this out if it's on Netflix or if it's on TV, and you can find it on Starz or HBO or something. You should definitely check it out. Definitely buy the Blu-ray, which I have, and I also have the poster hanging up in my bedroom, which is awesome. Yeah, that's my thoughts on Wonder Woman. I hope that you guys enjoyed this. I know I'm a little bit tired, so I didn't get to really talk about everything that I wanted to talk about with this review, but hopefully you guys learned a thing or two, and as always guys, rate, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.